Hello and welcome back to Mixing Mastermind. My name is Simon Jameson. So let's just crack on with today's subject, which is going to be around mastering. So actually the conversation is more around workflow, but it's going to be based around kind of mastering and what that means within mixing today. So traditionally, mixing and mastering were done as two separate processes. So the mix was probably printed down on a console and then sent off to a separate studio where it was mastered by someone completely different. So the process around this was, I think, well, two things really, that the equipment needed for both tasks was at the time very, very different. So I'm talking about the analog consoles and, more of like the old school approach to mixing. The mastering studio, I didn't need a console and had much more specialized hardware and much more specialized monitoring as well. And also someone that was trained and did mastering just full time, had a good ear for it. And that was, something that people really valued. So, but fast forward to 2021, I mean, since I've been mixing, which has been 10 years plus, I've never really had anyone master my own material actually. So it's not really a process that I'm very familiar with. I've always just had to kind of do it myself. It was just kind of expected. So yeah, that was really something I had to learn and kind of refine as I went along and, copy other people's settings and try things out and see what works. And now it's become a really important part of my own workflow and how I mix. So to explain that, really, it's mostly what someone might call top-down mixing, which is really using more processing on the master bus and then the groups than on the individual tracks. So with my mix, I like to get the balances going, the panning going, the basics of the mix, the gain staging and all that kind of stuff. And then quite quickly after that, I'm going to try and look at my mastering chain. I have like a basic preset that I start with, which is about 6 or 7 plugins. And then from there, I'm going to start tweaking the stuff and then maybe add a few, take a few away to see what the song needs. Mostly I'm using saturation and EQ at this point. And at the very end of the chain is like my limiter for the loudness that I need. Actually, I have no compression on my master bus, hardly ever. That's because I'm doing a lot of compression and I want that all done in the actual groups of my mix. And if I start to use my bus compressor, then I find that the balance of my mix goes a little bit too far out. I could have the vocals pushing down the other instruments at that point where I've had them nice and balanced before, and then all of a sudden things start to get a bit weird. So I generally tend not to use a bus compressor of any kind. But I know that's something that people typically would do. But with my kind of setup, I have my bus compressor is on my instruments group, and then the vocals and instruments get sort of summed together on the master bus. So that's kind of where my workflow maybe is a little bit different. So there's other approaches to this kind of workflow, which some people use. For example, you could just bounce out your mix and master it in a separate session. This can be useful if your computer hardware is not quite up to scratch, because having the mastering plugins running at the same time with your mix plugins can be pretty CPU intensive. So this might not be a bad idea. It's something that I've tried out myself, also as just a workflow thing, just to have a kind of separate mindset to kind of mixing compared to mastering. But I've really found that for me personally, when I'm mixing, the mastering plugins and the settings there are so integrated into what I'm doing. I'm constantly tweaking my mastering chain and going back and then tweaking my mixing and then, going backwards and forwards. And it's really just becomes just like one process to me. I think it really works so much better than trying to separate it. So the point of this really isn't to tell you there's a right way or there's a wrong way to do this. It's really just to give you some insight into what I do. In the next video, I'm going to be showing off some of my plugins that I use and some of the settings and my starting points and maybe some things that I like to add or take away from that, depending on the stuff I'm working on. So yeah, if you don't do it this way, then it might be something interesting to learn, and maybe you can try it out and see if it works for you. And if you do, then maybe you'll get an idea of some interesting plugins to try, and maybe you have some ideas for me, because I'm always up for trying some new plugins and trying to make things better. So until the next video, take care, stay safe, and happy mixing.